Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine walking into your favorite grocery store, right? You reach for that staple item, maybe it's oats, maybe it's coffee, and the shelf is just empty. That's exactly what happened at a Texas Whole Foods recently, all thanks to a cyber attack most people probably never even heard about. But here's where it gets really interesting. That single event, it didn't just mess up one store. It sort of pulled back the curtain on an entire, largely invisible industry, an industry that's, well, absolutely essential to getting food onto your table.
Yeah, what's fascinating there is how quickly a digital disruption can suddenly show the physical weaknesses, the vulnerabilities in our food supply chain.
Right.
We're talking about these silent giants, the
Yeah.
companies operating between the folks growing or making the food and the grocery stores you actually shop at.
The middleman.
Exactly. And this incident with United Natural Foods, UNFI, it serves as this perfect lens, really, to understand the true complexities, the hidden dynamics of how groceries work in the U.S.
That's a critical point. So for this deep dive, our mission basically is to explore exactly what that UNFI cyber attack tells us about the U.S. grocery industry. We want to dissect how these crucial wholesalers operate, how they make their money, and some of that is pretty surprising, actually, and what it all means for you, the person pushing the cart. We've pulled insights from a recent Forbes piece by Errol Schweitzer to help guide us through this intricate world. So, okay, this cyber attack hit UNFI back on June 5th. For people who might not know, UNFI, what kind of impact does something like this actually have? Are they just a small player or is this bigger?
Oh, much bigger, far from niche. UNFI is a $30 billion grocery wholesaler. And importantly, they're Whole Foods Market's largest supplier.
30 billion, okay?
Yeah, but it doesn't stop there. They service over 15,000 other places, supermarkets, co-ops, health food stores, chain stores, you name it.
Wow.
So the cyber attack basically crippled their ordering systems, their replenishment systems, caused widespread disruption.
So stores couldn't get their products?
Exactly. Grocers were scrambling, trying to find products from other sources. It put immense pressure on supply chains, like across the entire industry. It really highlights the pivotal role these wholesalers play. You know, when a wholesaler like UNFI sneezes.
The whole grocery industry catches a cold. Yeah, I like that.
Pretty much.
That really paints a picture. We often think, grocery stores, food producers, but these middlemen are clearly vital. What exactly do they do day to day to connect those dots?
Well, wholesalers are that critical link between producers, manufacturers, and the retailers. They're handling millions of cases of product every single day.
Millions.
Millions. Now, some larger retailers, they might do a portion of their own wholesale distribution, sure. But these third-party operators like UNFI, they're essential for feeding a huge chunk of America. And even though they're handling, get this, over $300 billion a year in retail value.
300 billion.
Yep. They are, as you said, largely invisible to us as consumers.
It's amazing, isn't it? So foundational yet so unknown. And UNFI isn't the only one doing this, right? Who else is out there in this behind-the-scenes world?
Oh, no, not at all. Besides UNFI, you've got C&S, that's a $23 billion company. They supply thousands of independent stores and chains, mostly on the East Coast.
Okay.
Then there's McLane, a $50 billion operation wholly owned by Berkshire Hathaway. They're a major supplier to giants like Walmart and Wawa.
Berkshire Hathaway. Well,
Yep. Spartan Nash, partially owned by Amazon, another big player. And UNFI's main rival, KeHE, they're employee-owned, actually, a behemoth serving places like Sprouts, H-E-B, thousands of natural and specialty food stores. And these primary wholesalers like UNFI and KeHE, they typically distribute the lion's share of all the packaged stuff, center store items, drinks, dairy, frozen foods, to grocers like Whole Foods and Sprouts.
so these relationships between the wholesalers and the retailers, they sound incredibly tight, almost like mutually dependent. How does that dynamic work? Who holds the power or sets the terms?
It's definitely a two-way street, yeah, but with a unique kind of power dynamic. Retailers basically dictate what the wholesaler sells to them.
Okay.
That's based on their contracts, their category management strategies, everything from new products they want to launch to their own private label programs. And that's usually specific to each wholesale warehouse location.
Right.
In return, though, the wholesaler controls a lot of the market access for thousands of brands and suppliers that those retail buyers have approved.
Ah, I see. So the retailer says, I want this, and the wholesaler becomes the gatekeeper for getting it there.
Exactly. The retailer demands certain products, and the wholesaler is the gateway for those products to actually reach the retailer's shelves.
And what's the main incentive for a retailer to funnel almost everything through just one primary wholesaler? What do they get out of that kind of arrangement?
For the retailer, the big carrot is a very low cost plus markup from the wholesaler.
Cost plus.
Yeah, think of it like paying just a small percentage above whatever the wholesaler paid for the product,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 6, 7%.
That sounds low.
It is low.
Yeah.
And in exchange for that low rate, the retailer requires most of its suppliers, the brands, to go through that primary wholesaler. That drives massive sales volumes for the wholesaler, which justifies that low markup.
Ah, okay. Volume makes it work.
Right. And the wholesaler, in turn, guarantees things like product placement, inventory prioritization, better delivery schedules, especially important during disruptions like that cyber attack. It consolidates everything and essentially creates a near monopoly on supplying all the packaged food and drinks into that grocer's departments.
Okay, so the main job is clear. Get products from A to B efficiently, low markup for the big retailers. But the source we looked at mentioned that this core function doesn't always pay the bills for wholesalers. Given these really thin margins you mentioned, how do wholesalers actually manage to stay profitable? The source hinted at some less than obvious ways they make money.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting
Mm.
and maybe a bit murky. Wholesalers operate on extremely thin gross margins. For UNFI, it's typically around 13.5%.
13.5%. Okay.
But their contractual markup to huge customers, like Whole Foods, can be as low as 6 or 7%, sometimes even lower for store brand products.
Wait, so if their overall margin is 13.5, but they're selling to big guys at 6 or 7.
Exactly. On the surface, it looks like they're losing several percentage points on every single case they send to these big retailers.
So how do they make that up?
To cover that gap and actually turn a profit, they primarily do two things.
Okay. What are those two mechanisms?
First, they charge much, much higher markups to the smaller independent retailers, the ones who aren't part of those big, advantageous cost-plus agreements.
Ah, okay. The little guys pay more.
A lot more sometimes. These, one-off independent stores might be paying 20, even 30% markups on the exact same items that a big cost-plus retailer is getting for, say, 6 to 10%.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It's significant. And the implication is stark. Prices at chains like Kroger or Walmart can actually be lower than an independent grocer's wholesale cost before the independent even adds their own retail markup.
Ouch. That really incentivizes independents to, what, join cooperatives or something?
Precisely. Join co-ops to negotiate better terms, get some collective bargaining power.
Okay, so that's one way.
Okay.
Charge smaller stores more. That puts them at a huge disadvantage right away. What's the other main way wholesalers make up that difference?
The second way, and perhaps the more opaque one, is through what's often called inside margin from suppliers.
Inside margin.
Essentially, yeah. It means additional revenue streams, often less transparent, that wholesalers extract from the suppliers, the brands making the products. It goes beyond just the standard markup on the product cost. These are revenue streams you don't usually hear about on earnings calls or, see discussed on CNBC.
Like what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, things like really strict payment terms, maybe 60-day non-payment windows when a product first launches, mandatory free fills where the supplier just gives them product for free to start, and then there are slotting fees, basically payments just to get a product onto the wholesaler's shelf or even just into their computer system.
Paying just to be listed.
Paying just to be listed, yeah. Then you have various promotional discount models that suppliers are often, let's say, strongly encouraged or forced to fund. Things like manufacturer chargebacks or MCBs and off-invoice discounts.
Okay, manufacturer chargebacks, MCBs. The source called them one of the industry's most discussed and unpopular open secrets. That sounds ominous. Can you unpack what makes them so notorious?
Right. MCBs, they're basically a discount taken off the inbound cost of a product right when it hits the wholesaler's loading dock.
Okay.
But unlike a simple, transparent off-invoice discount, which generally flows through to the retailer and maybe the consumer, the MCB is billed back to the supplier at an additional retail markup.
Wait, a markup on the markdown?
You got it. It effectively inflates the value of the discount the wholesaler can claim back from the supplier. So the core insight here is that a supplier might think they're offering, say, 20% off their list cost to fund a promotion. But they could end up being billed back for 35 or even 40% of their product's cost because of how that MCB is structured with the added retail markup.
That sounds complicated and not great for the supplier.
It's complex. And many retailers, like Whole Foods and Sprouts, they know about these practices. They actually contractually require the wholesalers to rebate a portion of that extra cut back to them, the retailers, through something called a true-up.
So even when I see something on sale at the grocery store, that discount is often funded by the suppliers through these MCBs, which also generate extra cash for the wholesaler, and then some of that cash might go back to the retailer.
That's often how it works, yes.
Yeah.
The supplier funds the discount, the wholesaler takes a cut, often inflated by that retail markup, and the retailer might get a piece of the wholesaler's cutback.
Okay. But then the source says that off-invoice discounts, the other kind you mentioned, can sometimes be even worse for suppliers. How is that possible if MCBs sound so challenging already?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but the mechanism behind off-invoice discounts raises some serious questions about fairness. While MCBs have their issues with transparency and the markup on markdown thing,
Right.
off-invoice discounts allow wholesalers to do something called forward buying.
Forward buying.
It means they can buy huge amounts of product at the promotional discount price, like right at the very end of a sale period.
Okay.
Then they can turn around and sell a lot of that inventory later at the regular non-sale price, pocketing a much higher margin.
Ah, so they stock up cheap and sell high later.
Exactly. Or they can do bridge buying. Stock up enough inventory at the end of one sale period to last them until the next sale period starts, effectively avoiding buying products at the regular cost from suppliers in between promotions.
I see. So the supplier gives a discount intended for a short promotion, but the wholesaler uses it to get cheap inventory for weeks or months.
That's the issue. The practical effect is that this really eats into the supplier's margins. And often, you, the consumer, don't actually see those extra inventory discounts reflected in lower prices in the store after the official sale ends. When a supplier is basically covering a wholesaler's bridge buy or funding really aggressive promotions like buy one, get one free offers, it can be devastating to their business, often with very little return on that investment. It creates an environment where suppliers feel pretty pressured to just go along with it.
It really sounds like a truly uphill battle for suppliers, especially the smaller ones, when these kinds of financial maneuvers are happening. Beyond these structured discounts and fees, what other, maybe more random challenges do suppliers run into with wholesalers?
Oh, the challenges especially for independent, family-owned emerging brands, they're unfortunately quite extensive. Beyond the sort of formal fee structures we talked about, they often run into just billing irregularities, like being charged the same fees twice, or getting paid late, but still having early payment deductions taken off. Another common one is just systematic payment withholdings for various reasons. Then there are just unexpected fees popping up, things like warehouse activation fees or listing fees that maybe weren't in the contract, or getting billed for monthly specials they never actually agreed to participate in.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It is. And perhaps most maddening are the erroneous deductions charges taken off their payments without any backup documentation, sometimes for thousands of dollars at a time, or charges for vague things like shrink or damage, or for products that supposedly went out of temp, which the wholesaler then maybe sent to a retailer who refused them, and the supplier gets stuck with the bill.
Wow, it sounds like you almost need a detective to figure out your invoices.
It's so complex and frustrating that it's actually led to this kind of cottage industry of forensic accountants who specialize just in auditing these wholesaler deductions and chasing down refunds for suppliers.
Forensic accountants for grocery bills. That really says something. So why have these practices become so common, almost like the standard way of doing business in wholesale grocery?
What truly underpins all of this, why these practices are so prevalent, is market consolidation.
Fewer, bigger players.
Exactly. They become more commonplace as the wholesale marketplace has shrunk into fewer, much larger companies. Like when UNFI acquired SuperValue a few years back. That consolidation, interestingly, was partly encouraged by investors who got spooked when Amazon bought Whole Foods, which, remember, was UNFI's biggest customer.
Ah, so it's a cycle. Fear drives consolidation. Consolidation creates more power.
It's a cycle where scale begets scale and power gets concentrated. Suppliers end up having very little say in these matters because, going back to that retailer dynamic,
Right.
the retailers are often contractually obligated to push their suppliers into using their primary wholesalers. Why? To get the benefit of those cost-plus agreements we talked about, which can shave 5 to 10% off their wholesale costs.
And that 5–10% is huge for the retailer's bottom line and shelf prices.
It's absolutely material to their own pricing strategy and profitability. So by controlling market access to those high-profile retailers, the big wholesalers can effectively make the rules. They can charge brand whatever this very constricted market will bear. And apparently it bears quite a lot.
So the retailers, in a way, are kind of caught in the middle too, aren't they? They're under pressure to keep prices competitive, especially against giants like Walmart and Aldi, and that pushes them to rely on this consolidated, maybe sometimes problematic wholesale market. Are there any alternatives to this dominant model? Anything that offers a different dynamic?
Yeah, you're right. The retailers are ultimately responsible for how the sector functions, given their demands for those low costs to stay competitive, especially now with inflation hitting key goods. There really are few alternatives that can offer that same broad range of goods at the super low costs retailers feel they need. Some retailers, like H-E-B down in Texas or Kroger, they still self-distribute a lot of their high-volume packaged food products, or they've internalized wholesale operations, like Stop and Shop and Giant's parent company, Ahold Delhaize.
Okay, so some big ones handle it themselves.
Some do. Others might lean on higher cost, but maybe more customer service-oriented wholesale operators. These might provide essential services like importing specialty goods, handling private labeling, or even providing in-store merchandising support. But it usually comes at a higher cost.
That makes sense. Are there any cooperative models out there that try to counteract this concentration of power among just a few big wholesalers?
Yes, absolutely. That's a really important point. Many independent retailers have banded together to form wholesale cooperatives. They leverage their collective scale, their group buying power, to access products at more competitive prices.
Like who? Any examples?
Sure, there's the Greater Austin Merchants Association, Associated Wholesale Grocers, Twin Cities Co-op Partners up in Minnesota. Wakefern, based out in New Jersey, is actually the largest such cooperative in the country. Nearly $20 billion in annual sales through hundreds of independent owner-operated stores like Fairway and ShopRite.
20 billion from a co-op. Wow.
Yeah, and the New York City metro area is somewhat unique, actually. It has a real abundance of independent and cooperative wholesale and retail operators compared to other places. But most U.S. metro areas, they're not so lucky. They're often dominated by just a handful of large grocery chains, and they lack that diverse array of wholesalers. Again, it's that scale begets scale thing. Market concentration becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. The source we read aptly described the current system as kind of like Robin Hood in reverse.
Robin Hood in reverse. That's a powerful way to put it, taking from the smaller players, the suppliers, the independents, and consolidating power and money at the top.
Precisely. It really highlights how the benefits often flow upstream, away from the producers and ultimately often away from consumers too, towards these incredibly powerful middlemen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the really profound thing here is how just one event, like a cyber attack, can suddenly pull back the curtain on this incredibly intricate and, like we said, largely invisible system. We've seen that wholesalers are, undeniably vital, right? Handling over $300 billion in retail value every year. They're the essential connection getting products from the manufacturers to your local store shelf. Yet those thin margins we talked about, they basically compel them, or at least incentivize them, to rely on these hidden revenue streams from suppliers, often at the expense of small businesses, and ultimately that can impact the consumer too. And the consolidation in the sector just means there are very few alternatives, creating this powerful, often quite opaque marketplace.
So, drilling down, what does this all mean for you listening and your next trip to the grocery store? Well, it means the prices you actually pay, the variety you see, or maybe don't see, on the shelves, even the existence of some of your favorite small or local brands. They're all shaped by these unseen forces, these complex relationships we've been talking about. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? The journey of your food to your plate is just far more intricate than it looks on the surface.
And this really prompts an important question, I think. In an era where we're constantly grappling with things like cybercrime, trade wars, climate change affecting harvest, pandemics disrupting everything, social upheaval, is a heavily consolidated, often opaque wholesale grocery sector
Yeah.
truly the most resilient or even the most equitable way to stock our shelves and keep America fed? The source makes a sobering point. The next supply chain crisis, whatever form it takes, is probably only a matter of time.
Indeed. A lot to consider there, isn't it? We hope this deep dive has given you maybe a fresh perspective on the hidden gears turning behind the scenes in the grocery world. Keep that curiosity alive, ask questions, and we'll be back soon with another deep